was glad when they said, come let us go to the house of the Lord. I was glad when they say, come let us go to the church with no walls. You are my brother, you are my sister. From all over the world we are united in the house of God, in the church with no walls.
Welcome to the Church with No Walls podcast. I am your host, Ryan Dearbone, and this week we talked to Angela Griffith, who calls herself the Christian Sexpert. And because of that, I want to make sure that I give this disclaimer to the listeners. We will be talking about sex and religion and the Bible in this episode. And if that's a topic that you feel that is not appropriate, if that's a topic you feel you do not want to hear, please feel free to move on from this podcast episode, and please enjoy the rest of the other podcast episodes that we have from the previous episodes as well as upcoming episodes. But as part of the podcast, I felt it was very important to have a conversation about her outreach ministry, in which she talks about how couples can have good sex and how people can understand sex as it relates to the Bible. So this conversation is simply meant as an educational piece. It is not meant to offend anybody, and it is not meant to act like we are the end-all be-all and we know everything about religion and sex. But I did feel this was an important topic to cover as part of the podcast, so please enjoy if you are going to listen to it. If you choose not to, that's fine as well. But we definitely want to make sure that we gave you a disclaimer ahead of time. Thank you so much, and enjoy the Church with No Walls podcast, this episode, and all of our other episodes. Welcome to this edition of the Church with No Walls podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Dearbone, and today joining me is Angela Griffith, who is known as the Christian Sexpert. So it's going to be a very interesting conversation. Angela and I have talked offline, and we've had a lot of good conversation. I think this is going to be a conversation that most people don't talk about when we talk about religion and church and ministry, but this is going to be a very interesting conversation. So, Angela, first of all, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And how are you doing today?
I'm fantastic. Thank you.
Well, great. And so, like I kind of alluded to, when we talk about Christianity and church and religion, uh, sex is not really talked about, or if it's talked about in very, very small, very contained ways. So, first of all, just talk a little bit about how you call yourself the Christian Sexpert. How did you get into the ministry, the religious, I guess,
Christian
part
sex
of
education.
Christian sex education? There you go. Go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people don't know what to do with me or my work, so I get it. A typical story goes, a million years ago when I was in school, good girls from small towns didn't go to school to become sex coaches. They went to college to get their MRS degree, and if you didn't graduate from a small Christian school, the MRS means the wedding ring. And so, being a good girl from a small town, I graduated with my bachelor's in religion and psychology, but I remained fascinated with human sexuality, studied everything I could get my hands on, and I had gotten married just a couple weeks after graduation. Um, and throughout our early marriage, I was studying all the things and studying human sexuality, theology, and eventually we had our son very late into our marriage. And I joined an online international women's ministry and just became part of the community, was eventually asked to join the leadership team for the ministry. And I started, and part of the reason I was asked to join the leadership team was because of my expertise in marriage, and sex and all of those conversations. So eventually, after I had my son, I joined an international online women's ministry and was eventually asked to be a part of the leadership team for the ministry because of the expertise in marriage and sexuality that I brought to the conversations. And the leaders and I were all talking one night because at the time, all of us were homeschooling our kids, and my son was really needy when he was little, and it didn't leave a lot of time for me to just exist as a human, let alone do anything else. But we were all sort of daydreaming, and I was like, you know what? When he grows up and doesn't need me so much anymore, I think I want to do this. I see the damage of purity culture. I see the damage of obligation sex messaging. And I know that's not God's plan for marriages. I know that God wants us to have abundance in all areas, including our sex lives. And I want to be part of the solution. And I feel like that night God kind of laughed at me because just a couple of months later, something else came up in the ministry, and one of my friends commented and said, paging the group Sexpert, Angela. And in like behind the scenes in the leadership group chat, somebody was like, Angela, that should be your TikTok handle, is the Christian Sexpert. And I was like, yeah. And I ran over and I reserved the name, and I was like, I'm not gonna do anything with this, but at least I've got it in case I ever do want to do something with it. But then kind of on a whim, I started posting on TikTok, and God was like, yeah, that's not a later dream. This is a now thing. And so we're going to start doing stuff now. And I, on a whim, posted it. That's aggressive. But I did it. I started posting, and I had started my account in late January. I,
Angela,
yeah.
you froze up for a second, so
Okay.
go back to where you said you started posting on TikTok.
Okay. Yep. So I kind of on a whim started posting on TikTok, and my friend was like, to really make it on TikTok, you have to post like 4 times a day. And I was like, excuse me, that's aggressive. But I did it really on a whim. I started my account in late January, but then by Easter of that same year, I had gone viral with a video at over 5 million views. And God just continued to blow up the work that I was doing, and over again showed me how very necessary my work is and how desperate believers are for healthy messaging about sex. Because just like you said, sex is not something that is talked about in church at all. And if it is talked about, I find it is generally in very unhealthy ways. It's either a purity culture message, which really I mean, we can deep dive purity culture if you want, but purity culture is a specific set of teachings that both commodify and fetishize female sexuality for male consumption. And we actually have studies, and I want to be clear that purity culture is not the same thing as biblical purity. So everybody put the pitchforks away. But we have scientific studies that show us that women who are raised in purity culture are twice as likely to experience female sexual dysfunction as their non-purity culture counterparts. And so girls and women were receiving this messaging before marriage, and then after marriage it turns into obligation sex messaging, where from the like I get sent sermons all the time where pastors are saying from the pulpit, the Bible says you can't deprive him, so you can never say no to sex at all, which is completely unbiblical, a complete twisting of scripture to satisfy male lust. And so that's another way that female sexuality is commodified and fetishized for male consumption within evangelical Christianity. And we have scientific studies that show us that after marriage, when women engage in what is consensual, unwanted sex. So she doesn't want to be having sex, but she feels obligated to do so because her pastor and her husband are telling her the Bible says you can never say no. Those women start to develop PTSD symptoms over time. The more they engage in consensual, unwanted sex, so he's not straight up raping her, right? Like people think like unwanted sex, like, oh, or when I talk about sexual coercion, people are like, well, nobody, like, you're not raping your wife, but there's ways to exert sexual violence against your spouse without stereotypical violence, right? And so those things, so now we have all of the science that is showing us that the messages that a lot of churches are putting out are harmful. And I just I want to be part of the solution.
And so you mentioned, and we'll kind of dive into purity culture and a little more into obligation sets. But so, like those first videos that you created, what were they talking about, and what do you think about them so much? You said there was a thirst and a hunger. What if so much about those first videos captured the attention of this? Younger, I mean, TikTok is generally a pretty young audience. Of this young audience, you think that kind of propelled your messaging and your ministry?
I think it's a stereotype that TikTok is a young audience, because the majority of my viewers are between the ages of 30 and 45.
Oh wow,
That's
okay.
the bulk of my audience is females between 30 and 45. So I think it's a, and I am very careful that if someone makes it obvious that they're under 18 when they show up in my space, I block them no matter what platform it's on,
Right.
just to put that out there. But I think what capture and when I look back at the early videos that I did, they are so bad. So like I cringe so hard because they're so bad. But I think what really captures people's attention is I am willing to say all the things and talk about all of the things that other people are not. So I have this phrase that I use, Tea Party Christians. And it's this idea because we're starting to hear more and more about this discrepancy in ministry where, you know, men's events get these cool like axe throwing and deep, you know, theological deep diving, the ancient Greek words and, things, and women get tea parties. And, we get another sermon on Esther or Ruth. And women in particular are so tired of the Tea Party sort of faith. They want, they are hungry for the deep diving of the ancient Greek just as much as the men are, right? They're looking for something authentic. And historically, when you looked for information on sex in evangelical Christianity, you get really toxic messaging, right? So the most popular Christian marriage book on the market is Love and Respect. And that book, as far as, I mean, I have a laundry list of issues with the book, but as far as the way that it talks about sex, it frames sex as something a man needs and never addresses female pleasure at all. It doesn't even attempt to address the fact that women can orgasm, that women want sex. One of the pillars of my work is healthy women in safe marriages don't turn down good sex for no reason. And the most popular Christian marriage books on the market are completely, at best, ignoring women's sexuality. And so I'm saying, or so at most, female sexuality is being ignored. At worst, it's being weaponized, where the statements are things like men have a need that women will never understand. Women just don't enjoy sex. Or, women are being told, oh, your husband was watching pornography. Well, why weren't you giving him more sex? So he wouldn't have to use pornography, right? They're being blamed for the sins of their husbands. Or if you could find something even moderately healthy, it was things like, oh, you want to spice up your marriage? Go buy some lingerie, and that will really set things on fire. And people are like, that's it? Like, that's the best you've got? And so, people are hungry for those conversations of, um, talking about the orgasm gap. Men are orgasming over 90% of the time during a sexual encounter with their spouse, whereas women are orgasming less than 50% of the time. And, talking about uh, well, if a woman is only orgasming less than 50% of the time, a lot of women don't know how to orgasm, and there's nowhere that you can, who are you going to turn to in your life and say, "Hey, I'm not coming. Can you teach me how?" There's nobody out there that can tell you, how to orgasm. Like I literally had a coaching client yesterday come to me because this woman in 3 decades of marriage has never orgasmed. And she came to me to learn how to orgasm. And so there's no one else out here that's teaching these sorts of things.
And so, kind of off of that, because these women just don't have anybody to go to ask to talk about that with the church. I could imagine that a woman wouldn't feel comfortable going to anyone in her church, maybe other than another maybe female church member to talk about that. But that again, that goes into the stereotype of the, well, we shouldn't be talking about this. That's
Hmm.
not something to talk about. So where does the church fit in with this? Obviously, you mentioned how some pastors are preaching toxic messaging, incorrect things, and things that are toxic. But how else can the church within those four walls, and we'll kind of move outside the walls back out there in a minute, but how can the church inside the walls be better and be more welcoming and opening for women to be able to talk about their sexuality and what they need as opposed to what's being told that they're supposed to do?
Well, I'm going to do some shameless self-promotion. They can bring me in to do a talk. Um,
Yeah,
is
go
one of the
for it.
ways
Yeah.
is they can you hire me to come speak at your
Yeah.
next women's event. If you feel compelled to serve tea, you can still serve your tea, but I will bring toys and we can educate women on how to orgasm with their husbands as well while they're sipping on that green tea. Okay. Um, so there's that. But one of the things is we need to start recognizing, oh, this is as if I haven't already been controversial. We need to start recognizing the role that a pastor is meant to play in our lives versus the role that we give pastors in our lives. Um, Far too many so I am still on the leadership team for that Natural Moms group ministry. And almost every time a marriage conflict issue comes up, or even marriage abuse issues come up, people jump to, well, have you talked to your pastor? The majority of pastors, first of all, receive no education about sexual health in their Scott, if you're a pastor, and that's another like not all pastors actually go to school for ministry, right?
Hmm.
A lot of, especially in smaller churches, they're hiring the pastor's son who just,
Hmm.
graduated or whatever, graduated college with his marketing degree or something, right?
Hmm.
Or they're handling Grandpa Joe who's been here for 75 years, right?
Hmm.
So you have these people who, first of all, have no um, psychology education, no sexual health scientific education, and also no legitimate counseling, therapy education, right? He might, if he went to school, he might have had one course on like biblical counseling, but that's not how to recognize signs of abuse, what covert marital sexual coercion within a marriage looks like. You know, he has no training on all of these things. But what the first sign of a marriage problem, believers are telling other believers, will go to your pastor. That person is woefully ill-equipped to deal with the issues that they are being brought. And that's not, I'm not trying to bash any individual pastor when I
Hmm.
say this. I am saying that the church is a subculture of the greater American culture, and American culture loves a celebrity. And so we turn pastors into mini local celebrities. And we expect celebrities to know all of the things and have all of the answers. And we have this implicit trust without really thinking about, does this person actually have education to be speaking into this issue? The best pastors are going to meet with you and say, "Oh my gosh, I don't have enough education to help you. Here are some resources," right? And I believe that there's a lot of pastors that genuinely want to help in these circumstances, but they don't necessarily recognize that they don't have the correct training to be able to have these conversations. And so I think one of the first things is for both parishioners and pastors to start to recognize the limitations of the office and don't run straight to the pastor. But then also, pastors need to start seeking out the healthy resources, like myself. Um, Bare Marriage, Sheila Ray Gregor has a lot of great resources and books, and she actually talks about the harmful messages in the most popular Christian books on the market. So if you are a church who has been promoting love and respect, go to her website and figure out what's wrong with it. Why is it causing harm to the people in your care? Um, and people get really upset when I talk about love and respect, and they're like, well, it helped me. Okay, cool. Cigarettes help people lose weight, but that doesn't mean it's not going to give you cancer. It's the same thing. We have objective evidence that like a lot of the most popular Christian marriage books cause harm. And when you dismiss that and say, well, it helped me, you're saying that you smoke cigarettes to lose weight and you're going to be shocked when you get lung cancer.
Yeah.
It was a really long rant.
No, you're fine. So now, when looking at this, when looking at this younger generation coming in with all of the information that's, because sex is a conversation for everybody. It doesn't matter, it's
Hmm.
on social media, it's everywhere. What do young people, male or female, doesn't matter, what do they need to know about their sexuality and how that plays into their religious, their spiritual, their Christian journey? Because I feel like a lot of young people aren't getting the right message or aren't getting enough of the message. So how does that play
Right.
into their life?
So historically, what the church has done when talking about sexuality and young people is purity culture messaging. And purity culture messaging is a very specific set of teachings, and it told young people, it tried to exert control via shame and those sort of techniques to exert control to keep people from the idea was just don't have sex. And actually, I just listened to a super fascinating podcast that actually talks about how politics drove the abstinence only education programs that the church picked up on. So this sort of stuff didn't necessarily start within evangelical Christianity. It started in politics as a sort of response to the AIDS epidemic and things like that. And the church, Jerry Falwell, Dobson picked it up and really was the driving force in that. The podcast that I listened to with that information is the title of the podcast is Sex Therapy 101 with Cami Hurst. And the specific episode is Untangling Duty Sex with Dr. Tina Shermer Sellers from June 19th. If you want to deep dive sort of the history of purity culture and the abstinence only education. And when I talk about this, people get really upset because they're like, oh, you're just saying that it's just fine to have premarital sex. And I'm like, that's not what I'm saying at all. I am saying that the church has done a really bad job at communicating to young people God's biblical design for sexuality. And yes, God's biblical design for sexuality is that sex within marriage is his most perfect plan for our lives. But abstinence only education fails to take God's design for human development into account, right? Teenagers have raging hormones. Their sex hormones are really going ballistic because they're coming online, right? As they're developing at 13, 14, 15, 16. And they also have a not yet fully developed prefrontal cortex, which means they're really crappy at thinking through the consequences of their decisions because their brain does not have the ability to do so because that's how God designed them. People want to act like teenagers and bad decisions are some sort of moral issue that they just need punished into better and shamed into better decisions. And they don't think about the fact that God didn't design our brains to be fully formed until our early 20s. And so when you're shaming a kid for his bad decisions at 15, like, yes, and I'm not saying that we don't teach him to do better,
Mhm.
but you're not accounting for his development. So that's a whole parenting rant I have. Um, And so when we're talking about, purity culture failed, abstinence only education isn't the best plan, in part because it offers no scientific, evidence-based, fact-based information. Parents are so terrified of inciting curiosity in their children that they don't realize that when you refuse to answer questions, when you fail to give information, first of all, you are handing your child a bucket of internalized shame because if they're asking the questions and you tell them they don't need to know that, they're too, why are you asking me that? Where did you hear that? You're telling them that there's something wrong with them for asking the question. And now they feel shame about their curiosity. And curiosity is morally neutral. There is no shame in curiosity, right? And they're going to go looking for the information elsewhere if you won't give it to them. And what they're going to find and what is the most prevalent source of quote sex education in our world today? Porn. It's not accurate, but it's the most easily accessible, and it feels like information to someone who has no other frame of reference for information about sex. And so if you aren't the one educating your teenager, your young person, first of all, sex education starts from birth. Children are born sexual beings. The fact that we are born with sex organs makes us sexual beings from birth. That does not mean that we employ our sex organs from birth. That means that we need to recognize the fact that God designed your child to be a sexual being when they mature. And so you don't tell a child, I was thinking about this yesterday. Why is it that we delight when our babies discover their fingers for the first time, right? Everybody, if you're a parent, you remember the first time your baby realized they have toes and they set, and your baby because, babies just bend. And so they bring their foot up real close to their face and they're just staring at their toes. And as parents, we delight in that. But the first time your baby boy discovers he has a penis when you take his diaper off, you flip out and you swat his hand away and tell him no, no, no. To the baby, his penis is no different than his toes. It's neutral to the baby. It's and you as the parent are internalizing the messaging and you're passing that internalized message down when you imply that there's something wrong with your child discovering the fact that he has a penis. So so And I kind of went, to birth when you're really talking about young people who that are entering, you know, um, churches. And so I think one of the biggest things that we need to that young people need to understand about their sexuality is you are created to be a sexual being. You are designed to experience pleasure. God intends for you to experience pleasure in your life. But just like other things, it's whether you want to align that pleasure with God's best plan for you, or if you want to take the 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 Timu version and settle for less than God's best plan. Because sex outside of marriage is pleasurable. If you're doing it right, it doesn't matter if you're married or not. Sex is pleasurable at like when you break it down to the base level. But all decisions have consequences. And so choosing to engage in it and embrace your full sexual identity outside of God's best plan carries consequences that can potentially last a lifetime. And that is not to say that anybody should be, if you've made bad choices, God has redemption for that. I didn't get saved until I was 19. I was no virgin when I got married. Um, I had a lot of sex before I got saved. And so I've walked through that and I know the consequences that come from that. But teaching people that they're worthless if they choose sex outside of marriage isn't God's plan either. So it's a really big, complicated, nuanced issue. But the church is afraid to admit that young single people are sexual beings. They want to just ignore it and oppress it because people are afraid to have those conversations. And so there needs to be an acknowledgement that young single people are sexual beings and they are starting to come into their sexual identities at, you know, as a teenager and in their early 20s. And there needs to be space for those conversations because ignoring it only breeds shame.
And it seems that a lot of times, you mentioned porn, you mentioned stuff like that. That it's simply written off as a perversion, and that's it.
Hmm.
There's no understanding as to why this isn't part of God's, best plan. Why, pornography isn't necessarily, you like you said, it may look good, it may educate you, it may feel good to watch it, well, all that stuff like that, but it doesn't enhance. It doesn't speak to God's plan for you. It's just kind of written off as, okay, this is an abomination. You're wrong because you've done it. There is no redemption for you. You need to, cold turkey cut it because otherwise you're damning yourself to hell, and that's it.
Hmm.
Um, do you find that same thing to be true when people are talking about when they're talking about masturbation? You kind of touch on it with sex work, but masturbation, when they talk about adultery, that it's kind of that same thing. It's like you're banished to hell because you've done it or you've thought about it, and there is no recourse for you. There is no education on why these aren't part of the plan God has laid out for you, even though they are there and they're pleasurable while you're seeing it or doing it.
Yeah, so sexuality is the church's pet sin. Um, it just is. It's the church's pet sin. And the thing is, God doesn't see a um God doesn't see a homosexual relationship any different than he sees sex before marriage, any different than he sees lying, any different than he sees gossip, any different than he sees selfishness. Those are all exactly the same, but the church ranks them almost in that exact order. Homosexuality is the worst of the sexual sins. And then it's, I would say the next one the church ranks is a woman that the church has deemed promiscuous, or a woman that the church has deemed trying to attract sexual attention. And then I would say the next ranking falls to the woman that the church is saying is withholding sex from her husband. And then further down that list is the man who is using pornography or the man who cheated on his wife, right? Because it's the woman, the woman's consistently blamed. Oh, the woman led him into temptation. Oh, his wife wouldn't have sex with him. So of course, he had to use pornography, right? Because in evangelical culture, men are just sex crazed animals who can't control themselves. Everybody wants to talk about self-control until it comes to talking about a man having self-control over his sexual urges. And so the church has demonized all forms of sexuality except for a very specific set of circumstances, and that is a woman having sex with her husband when he wants it, to make sure that she is not depriving him. And like even you mentioned masturbation, we have a huge problem with biblical literacy in the modern American church, really understanding that the Bible wasn't written in English. It's been translated, and translation is a science that is continuously improving. And so the words that are, and there, we know, so think about the German word Schadenfreude, Schadenfreude, the delight at someone else's expense, right? That's a single word in German, but it's a whole concept that we don't have a single word for in English. We have to translate it as a phrase. And so when you're translating an ancient biblical text, you cannot have a word for word translation because there are some words that convey a whole phrase that simply do not exist in modern American English, right? And so the illustration that I really like to use for this is in 2000 years, if someone were to uncover my cell phone and manage to get it powered up, and they would look at the text messages between myself and my husband, they would look at that string of text messages and say, these people, this couple, must have been eggplant farmers and peach farmers. They must have had a peach and an eggplant farm because this woman uses a lot of eggplant and peach emojis in her communication with her husband. So they must have had an eggplant farm. Now, we have a cultural understanding of what an eggplant emoji means in modern America. And if you live under a rock, it means a penis. And a peach
Hmm.
is a vulva, right? And
Yep.
I, as a sex educator, use those emojis a lot to indicate an eggplant, to indicate a penis and a vulva. And but there would be a lack of cultural understanding of that. And so when we are reading verses about sexuality and things like that from the Bible, we have to remember that you cannot just read it as written on the page in English. You have to also understand the historical and cultural context so that you have a better picture of what was being intended. Because when Paul was writing his letters to the Corinthians, he wasn't thinking, I am writing the Bible. This sentence will be chapter 12, verse 5. He was writing a letter to his friends to tell them to get it together because they were a mess,
Yep.
right? He was
Yep.
not intending to write the Bible. And so, because he was just writing a letter to his friends, there was a level of an expectation of a cultural understanding of some of the words and phrases that he was using that he didn't sit there and spell out the explanation because his friends would know exactly what he was talking about.
Right. Right. It's like texting.
Mhm.
You talk in codes that the people
Oh,
around you
yeah.
know, as opposed to a blanket statement that everyone is going to read and have to decipher.
Right. Exactly. And so, but modern Americans are so woefully uneducated about how to read the Bible properly, how to understand the Bible properly, how to study it properly, that we're just opening it up to a random page and saying, "Oh, that's what this says." Okay, and moving on. Right? And so like you mentioned, and the whole point of this is you mentioned masturbation. When we read the Bible, we realize that the Bible doesn't actually specifically address self-touch. But that goes back to the verse, God looks at the heart, man looks at outward appearance. So when I talk about masturbation, what I say is the Bible doesn't specifically address self-touch, but the Bible does address lust. And so my first question for you is, why is that something that you're wanting to do? If you are single, is it because you are craving the chemical cocktail that an orgasm releases and you're actually just seeking dopamine? If you're bored and you're seeking dopamine, let's create a dopamine menu and find other ways for you to experience pleasure, right? That isn't a slippery slope into something else. If you're married and you are asking me about masturbation, why is that? Are you asking about masturbation because you are trying to avoid intimacy with your spouse? Because you're trying to avoid sex with your spouse, because the investment of turning your wife on is more emotional labor than you want to do, and so you want to take the easy way out and masturbate and just avoid the investment in your spouse? Or are you a married couple asking about masturbation because he's going to be deployed for the next year and you are trying to figure out ways to remain sexually connected even when he's on the other side of the country or the other side of the world, not the country, right?
Yeah.
And so when I talk about lust, I usually say first you need to talk to the Holy Spirit and really figure out, why is this something that I'm wanting to engage in? Is this something that I can engage in without lust? Is this something I can engage in only a few times before it starts to turn into lust? Is it a situation where, like I had friends where he was deployed for a year. And so one of the things that they did is they used the Marco Polo app, which is a video messaging app. And so she would record a video of herself thinking about her husband. He, in the Middle East, would then be able to watch the video when he had the privacy and opportunity to do so. He would record his own video, send it back. She would be able to watch the video when she was not solo parenting and homeschooling her 3 children. And so was it technically masturbation? By the strictest definition of the word, it was. They weren't in the same room. They weren't touching each other. Was it still sexual intimacy between them because they were only thinking about each other and they were engaging in each other sexually in an unconventional way thanks to the use of technology? And their marriage came out of that deployment stronger because they were able to engage with each other that way? Absolutely. But if you're using a highly religious, very strict rule, sort of definition of masturbation, they were masturbating. And that's why putting rules around the law or putting fences around the law doesn't work.
Mm.
Christians love a black and white lit. Christians hate nuance. We hate nuance because it requires our own independent thought process and logic. And we just want a list of do's and don'ts and to be told what we can and can't do so that we don't have to do a lot of the thinking for ourselves. So we don't have to spend time in the Bible looking for the answers and talking to the Holy Spirit about what his plan actually is for our personal lives and our personal situations. And so we want a list that gives us the law. Then we want to put a fence around that law so that we can say, oh, we can go up to the fence, but no further, so that we aren't going to accidentally break the law. But then fences around the law never actually work. Look at Eve. The command was, do not eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Why is that such a mouthful, right? But what did Eve tell the serpent? God said we can't touch it.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what God said. God said you can't eat it. God
Mm-hmm.
never said don't touch it. They put a fence around the law and they still waltzed right through the fence
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that's human nature.
Yeah. And as we kind of get to a point of wrapping up, for for us as a society, as we're continuing to with rampant social media, everything is changing. And as you've been able to use it for a force of good to be able to educate, how do we combat those who are using it, especially with that biblical mindset, those fences and everything? How do we combat those that are spreading the misinformation? How do we get them to where they're under to they're finding your space and not the spaces that continue that toxic the toxic teachings and doctrines that will rest assuredly get somebody in trouble, that will harm somebody, that will make them feel accused and abused by their sexuality.
So sharing, I mean, the top three things are always going to be like, share, and comment. Sending, reposting a video, reposting a Facebook post, um, engaging in things that will help boost the content in the algorithm are the most helpful. Um, Privately, messaging someone, oh, you were talking about this here, this content creator was talking, like, here's the counterpoint to it. Something else that really helps is when um, my followers will come across a toxic video and they will comment, oh, y'all really should actually go follow the Christian Sexpert because she talks about this from a healthier perspective. And so, like, just in that comment section, mentioning, that I and other creators exist and we talk about these things from a healthier perspective. Um, Go, send my information, my colleagues' information to your pastors and say, are you following her? Like, she has a lot of really great information. Um, Again, we should bring her in for a conference. But, if our leaders start engaging in these conversations and discovering the healthy creators, then hopefully the overall church culture will start to shift. If your pastor says something absolutely bonkers from the pulpit, push back. He's not above reproach. It is our job as Christians to check what your pastor is saying against the word. And if they're saying something that seems unhinged, push back and ask, well, how did you come to the, like, and don't be a jerk about it. They're
Mhm.
they're doing the best they can. But this could be a place of a lack of education and opportunity for you to say, hey, actually, I'm seeing this in the text. And here is someone who, has helped me come to that conclusion. Can we have a conversation about this?
And then I'm sure too, maybe if it's not the pastor, but maybe somebody else in the church who might be a good person to take on that role of maybe, for example, could be maybe the first lady of the church or somebody else in the church who wants
Mhm.
to be that counsel or be able to be that person. And maybe the pastor says, that's not, like he said, that's not my lane. That's not what I'm comfortable with. I'm not, that's not me. But maybe we find a place of space. Obviously, some bring in you or somebody like you, or have somebody in the church to become that expert or at least become knowledgeable in it enough to be able to have those conversations with women in the church, with young people, with those people who are going through sexual issues and trying to make sense of it. Would that be also a good
Yeah,
way to go? Yeah.
not everybody has the confidence
Mhm.
to do that kind of, to challenge someone in authority over them that way or something like that. So like my professional speaker bio calls me a challenger of the status quo, and one of my friends yesterday texted me and she's like, I don't understand how you have the energy to fight all of these people in your comments every day. And I was like, I'll fight a kitten if it looks at me sideways. I don't care. Because that's just my personality is I will challenge whatever. I don't doesn't matter to me. Um, but not everybody has that gifting on their life. I understand that. And so, yeah, seeking out the allies that you can pass information on to. And honestly, like um, Sheila Ray Gregor's book, The Marriage You Want, is a very healthy, science-backed. Here's the thing. A lot of Christian, this is complete rabbit trail. The majority of Christian books have not used any actual legitimate scientific research to write them. Sheila Ray Gregor's books, The Great Sex Rescue, She Deserves Better, The Marriage You Want, are all based on peer-reviewed science studies done on evangelical couples. The first scientific study of its kind that's actually looking at the people that are living this out day to day, right? And it's based on science. So go on Amazon, order 3 copies of the book, and send it to the church office for the pastors to all read a copy. You can send things from Amazon anonymously.
Yeah.
You can include a note that says, hey, I thought the pastor would really be interested in this book and the science and research in it. Like you can send things like that anonymously.
Wow, that's very good. So, last question for you, and we've kind of alluded to it. If people want to get a hold of you, if people want to connect with you, learn more about you as the Christian Sexpert, ask questions about things that they're going through, seeing, how do they get in contact with you?
I am the Christian Sexpert across all social platforms. My website is thechristiansexpert.com. You can book private coaching with me there. You can reach out to me about bringing me in to bring healthy messaging to your church. And you can see all of the resources that I have available on my website there.
And how often are you posting? Because I know you mentioned initially 4 times a day. Are you
Yeah,
posting that much or more?
no, I post 2 to 3 times a day because my primary, my my content creation drive, like this is getting into the business side of what I do, but my content creation drives all of the other things that I do. Um, so like this past fall, I actually got to speak at Women Evolve with Sarah Jakes Roberts, and she found me because of my social media posts. And so that really drove home for me that, the content is what is drives all of the other things that I'm doing. So I do post, I do occasionally I took a couple days off over the weekend for our anniversary, but for the most part, I'm posting daily. So you should be able to find me very easily.
Good deal. And one last question I just thought of. So, with all this to be said, everything that you're doing, you've done, how has this grown you spiritually and being able to be in this space and being in this place, learning what you've learned, being able to help the people you've helped, how has this strengthened your Christianity and your faith in your life?
I have to be in the Bible. If I am trying to tell someone that no, that verse about the Bible says you can't deprive me doesn't actually mean you can never say no. I have to be in the Bible, so researching the historical and cultural context and things so that I can actually back up what I'm saying, right? And it's been, I mean, taking more of a overview of it has been teaching me um, God really is doing things on our behalf that we have no idea, right? Like I just mentioned, speaking at Women Evolve, I was in the middle of a baseball stadium of 40,000 women.
Mm.
And if you had told me when I posted that first TikTok that it would lead me to a baseball stadium of 40,000 women all screaming orgasm at the same time, I would have cackled.
Wow.
Uh, because it seems so absurd.
Yeah.
I could have never even thought to get my content in front of Pastor Sarah to get to a point where she invited me on the podcast, to get to a point where she invited me to that baseball stadium. I couldn't have done that on my own. That was all God putting my content on her feed. I had no idea that that was happening until somebody slid into my DMs, and I thought I was being punked, honestly.
Mm.
I thought like it was a scammer at first, and they were like, "No, Pastor Sarah really wants you on our podcast." And I was like, "What? What? Nuh-uh. Nuh-uh. No, not what? Right. But God was orchestrating all of that. I had no clue. No clue. Absolutely no clue that he was going to change my life one day by someone just sliding into my DMs.
Yeah.
No clue. And so I get frustrated because this business is very uh unpredictable. I never know when I'm going to get my next speaking engagement. I never know when I'm going to get my next client. I never know when I'm going to post the next viral video.
Hmm.
And if I'm going through a season of, nobody's reaching out about a speaking engagement, I haven't signed a client in a couple of weeks. My view, I posted a video and it got 30 views. But I have 111,000 followers on TikTok. There's zero scientific reason I should be getting 30 views, right? That can feel really frustrating.
Yeah.
But reminding myself that God's actively working on something that you are not aware of.
Yeah.
You just have to continue to show up so that He has things to work with on your behalf. That's
Absolutely.
been a lot. Has been
Well,
a lot of because I love to control things, and so not having the control of all of that and trusting that He is doing things is not my favorite.
well, but as you said, God's been orchestrating and working on your behalf to get you to
Yes.
where you're at, and He will continue to because the work you're doing is it's
Yes.
needed because it's something like we talked about from the very beginning. Not everybody's talking about it, and apparently not everybody's talking
Yeah.
about it in the right ways.
Yeah, oh, for sure. I would say there is more unhealthy messaging surrounding sex than there is neutral or healthy messaging, for sure. So, those of us who are offering healthy messaging have to be twice as loud and work twice as hard because the unhealthy messaging is being platformed so easily and so readily, so much more available than
Mm.
us. And we are getting attacked by the fans of the unhealthy messaging. And like I am called a heretic or not really a Christian, Jezebel spirit. That's another one I get almost daily.
Mm.
Almost daily.
Wow. Wow.
So not only do I have to work twice as hard,
Mm.
I have to put up with hate. I've had hate mail in my mailbox. The house that my 10-year-old lives in, I have received hate mail on more than one occasion. I've had to file police reports
Mm.
because of things that I have received. So not only do I have to work twice as hard and be twice as loud, I have to I have to worry about my kid checking the mail.
Right. Wow. We will pray that the people that feel that way keep it to themselves because there's no place for that. There's no place for that, period. There's no place for that type of anger or demonstrating of it. There's no place for that. So we'll pray, that that stays far away from you because you don't deserve that. So,
Can you imagine being so angry about a person that you saw online telling you that they want you to have healthy sex, but that healthy sex requires something of you?
mhm.
And being so angry about that that you find their home address and you spend your grown-up money to send them things to their home address. Like if you would have put a fraction of that energy into loving your wife, you'd be having the sex that you're angry that you're not getting.
Yeah, that's it. That right there. That's it. That's it. That's it.
Well, that's the point.
Misplaced.
That's it. That's just that's the moment to say thank you. Go have good sex.
Well, Angela, it has been a pleasure having you on the podcast. Again, this is Angela Griffith, the Christian Sexpert. So if you are interested in learning more about her, she's on all social media platforms. She has a website. Check her out. Find out what you need to know. Have the conversations with whether it's her and getting her as a coach, with your spouse. Just have the conversations. Get educated on a healthy Christian sex life. So, Angela, thank you again for your time on the podcast. This has been very enlightening, very interesting, very much something I think our audience will have learned and grown from.
Thank you so much for having me, and go have good sex.
Well, couldn't say much better than that. So, as always, you listen to the Church with No Walls podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Dearbone. Take care and be blessed.
In the church with no walls, la, 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 without